So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and this is really great. I have been enjoying listening to people speaking prior to my presentation today. Um, this is all really, really important work, and so it's a great experience opportunity. I've titled my presentation, Shift Happens Rapidly, and what's really interesting is that, I hear so many people say, change can't happen, or it's really slow, or all that kind of stuff. But, my experience is I've seen stuff happen that you can't imagine in an unimaginable short period of time. And and what I'll talk a little bit about today is some of those elements that allow for change to happen fast, whatever it is that you're dealing with, whatever the issues are. So that'd be more of the second part of what I talk about. The first part will talk about the connection of food and climate and opportunities there. So let's see. I'm not sure who I point that at. Okay, good. So I always start with this because this is like really critical. Einstein said this thing, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And it's really true. And it's interesting that we're so loaded with paradigms, with belief systems, that it's so complex that you can have lots of belief systems that are the right thing, and then you can have 2 or 3 belief systems that cancels everything out that you think. And it would go with that food talk that was earlier, which was really good. And so so it's just really powerful how our brain, both what's conscious and also what's unconscious to us, affects everything that we do in our world, and it creates the world that we see and that we live in. And so my work is about how do you shift all these thoughts in order to create outcomes that are desirable. So in terms of the climate situation, everybody's seen these kinds of charts, I imagine. This is the CO2 concentrations from the observatories in Hawaii, and we're seeing more CO2 in the atmosphere. An interesting thing about this chart, besides the continued upward climb of parts per million in the atmosphere, is notice how there's a regular zigzag every year going up that chart. And it's the same difference every year. People know what that is? That's the northern and southern hemispheres breathing or not breathing. It's most of the land surface areas in the north. And so in our summer times here in the north, our Earth, the photosynthesis, plants are really sucking in carbon dioxide, and so the carbon dioxide levels drop during the wintertime, or during the summer months in the northern hemisphere, where most of the land is. In the southern hemisphere, there's more water, I think it's like a 30-70 ratio or something like that. Anyway, during their summer months, that's when we're putting off a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, because we don't have the photosynthesis machine in the southern part of the hemisphere that offsets that. So the point about this is really powerful what plants can do on an annual basis already. And then, of course, there's this graph about temperature changes over 10,000 years. And, it's been up, it's been down. The biggest point about this is, you see down there at the end, I see if this light works well enough, I don't know. Anyway, down the far end by 2000 there, notice how steep that curve is, how fast that's climbing, okay? Species have a difficult time adapting, like pollinators that need to move from the south to the north, or I got sandhill cranes in my fields next to me in New Mexico right now. Those things, the timing, when temperatures change so rapidly like that, that's really difficult. Same with microorganisms and soil, what's developed in the soil. How do those things move forward as they need to move as the temperature increases? Plants, how do plants move forward this quickly as temperature increases up and down, from north and south and stuff, or from the middle part of the earth to the poles? So that's probably one of the biggest challenges we got to deal with, is that steep curve that we're facing right now. So, climate has changed, the temperatures have changed, but they've never seen that kind of an increase in the last 10,000 years. So, very serious. So I like to remind people, Earth lies between these two planets called Venus and Mars. And if you look at the atmosphere of Venus and Mars, the yellow beans represent carbon dioxide, the red and the green represent oxygen or nitrogen and oxygen. And so Venus and Mars is almost dominant carbon dioxide. And we're in the middle of those two, and we're sort of a freak, you know. What's wrong with our planet? In fact, you actually see, I think on there, you might see it, there's only one bean up there in the upper corner on ours that's carbon dioxide. That's the amount of carbon dioxide percentage that's in our atmosphere. It's not very much at all. How in the world what happened? Why are we so weird? And why we're weird is we have this thing called food, okay? We have photosynthesis. And you think about it, there's this rock out in space that has figured out how to take beams of energy shooting out in the middle of nowhere, and it's figured out how to grab that energy and take carbon dioxide and water and make a thing called food, package it into sugars, into that sort of thing. And so that's the miracle of our Earth, and that's why we have the kind of atmospheric composition that we have today. Okay, and so and there's a guy named Jan Battista von Helmont. In 1649, he figured this stuff out. This isn't new stuff. This is old. And he was wondering what would happen if you put a 5-pound sprig of willow into a pot of soil, and so he weighed everything carefully. So he had 200 pounds of soil with a 5-pound sprig of willow, let it grow for 5 years, and added nothing but distilled water to it. And then he reweighed all the organic matter and the soil. And the tree now weighed 169 pounds. So it increased 164 pounds. But the soil only lost 2 ounces of soil. Where in the world did all that weight come from? It came from the air. So what we eat every day, those things that we're looking out there called trees, that's all air. When we have food, that's all air. That's all carbon dioxide. Okay? So it's incredible, the things we have. So you've got this little model about the magic of photosynthesis. You got sunlight, you got oxygen, you got carbon dioxide, you got oxygen being given off by plants, and then you got carbon dioxide mixed with water, and that creates the plants. So the different cycles here, that you get sugars are the byproduct that comes out on that side, and another byproduct is oxygen. And so it's just remarkable what that combination of things does. And to me, it always just amazes me that this little rock in space figured that out and stored this stuff for a long time into fossil fuel, which then we came along and figured out we could burn that to do, light this thing and all that kind of stuff. But just remarkable. So let's see, click there. So this, we're focused. We have a problem because we've been putting too much carbon up into the atmosphere. That's a challenge we have with which I showed in those graphs earlier. But this is a carbon cycle. It's not just a one-way thing. Okay, so the other part of this whole picture is bringing carbon back out of the sky. And if we went to zero emissions today, just stop putting any carbon in the sky, we'd still have some big problems with our climate. Okay, it's not any future emissions that we're trying to fix right now and negotiate. It's right now that we're having climate issues. Okay, like this week they had another first major storm in the earth for Fiji Islands, just happening right now. A couple of weeks or a week ago, there's another major first size storm. I mean, that's the kinds of stuff we're getting with tremendous frequency, and so that's old carbon that's been put up there already. So the equation to solve this problem that we have with climate is, of course, slowing down what's going up, or moving it to zero maybe, or even reducing it. But the other part is, how do we bring that stuff out of the sky that's already there? Okay, and that's a really cool link, is that's food, that's sugars, that's that opportunity. Rodale, I was at a conference in Washington, D.C. with them last year, a planning session, and this is from the executive director of Rodale, Mark Smallwood. He said that, basically the numbers that they said is that if everybody on Earth could farm and ranch like they do, and a few other people they were studying, we could pull 111% of the 2011 emissions out of the atmosphere. If we could all farm like that, if we could all ranch like that, 111% of the 2011 emissions. That's a lot. Just think what that would do to our climate situation we have now. We'd go into, almost reverse the problem to a point it'd probably be another type of problem that we create. So if we could get to that stage. So there's incredible potential of what we can do. The other thing that's really impressive with Rodale is that their yields are equivalent to the conventional model. So what they're doing organically and that kind of with that kind of work, they're able to produce the food production that the conventional model produces, which is often a big argument about why not shift. Well, they have shifted, and they're doing that kind of results. So not only can we produce the amount of food, but we can also do it in a way that pulls a heck of a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. Okay. So out of Leopold, I live, like I said, in New Mexico now, and out of Leopold formed the Gila Wilderness Area. It was the first wilderness area in the United States. He's an incredible individual. And one of his book, Game Management, he talks about, he says, game can be restored by the creative use of the same tools as heretofore destroyed it: the axe, the plow, cow, fire, and the gun. So what he's saying with taking care of wildlife and species, he said, you use those same tools, but you just rearrange how you do them. That gets back to Einstein saying about the same level of thinking can't solve the problem. You got to do it differently in order to solve the problem. And so I think the same thing, I just threw the idea that climate stability also is about rearranging the same tools. You do things differently, you get different results. And this is an example, back in 1994, I was working with the Colville Indians. I took them to, every year I went out a little further from the reservation to show them people that could actually do things differently, very significantly. And when we stopped at my friend Greg Simons in Utah by Cody, he drove us down to riparian area down by the stream there, and came to this fence, and it's the fence right here. And we looked across, and he said, "What do you see?" And of course, it's totally denuded, destroyed, blah, 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 not very healthy conditions. And let me put this down here. And out in the distance was a few cows. In fact, there's 30 cows out in that field. And then when we turn around and look where we're standing on the other side of the fence, and the fence is right here, look at the vegetation, the amount of vegetation that's there. I mean, you can hardly see people. And look at the condition of the banks. The stream is shaded. You know, it's cooler water. The habitat for fish is a lot better. There's amazing stuff that's going on. But look at the carbon that's captured there, the carbon between this side and that side, okay? And so I'm standing now where we were looking at earlier, the destroyed area, you know, I just call it that. And then look on the other side where we were standing, this beautiful, lush area. And this area had the 30 cows that we saw, and they're there for 100 days, okay? And so if you multiply it together, it's 3,000 animal days that have come off that land, and look at the amount of vegetation that's left after that. Well, the other side where we're standing has had 950 cows, and they were there for a total of 10 days. They actually went through there 3 times. So 3 times, like one was 3 days and 1 time. Another time was another 3 days. Another time was 4 days. So a total of 10 days. That's 9,500 animal days of pressure on that land. And look what the land looks like after that. It's like a herd of buffalo went through there, like a herd of wildebeest, a herd of antelope. That's what the lands used to look like. John Audubon writes about it in his diaries on the Mississippi River, okay? That migratory pattern of animals. And when you manage, and this gets back to what Aldo Leopold talks about, when you manage a different way, same animal, same tool, but a different response, you have a different result, okay? And so if you think about carbon capture, look at the difference in terms of what's left after that many animals have come off, 3,000 animal days of pressure here versus 9,500 animal days. Look at the amount of pressure that's on the land, okay, the results. And secondly, that's all food, the difference in the food production on the 2 sides. So just changing the way we do things creates totally different outcomes, right? And this is another interesting graph I thought I'd leave in this presentation, is that most of our focus is up there in that upper corner, fossil fuels and changes in land use. That's what's causing this extra carbon in the sky, okay? So this is the top is the amount of carbon going up, about 217 gigatons, and from these different sources. And the bottom one is the amount of carbon coming back down. And even though the oceans are 70% of the Earth surface area, they're only about 40% of the photosynthetic capture and also the carbon release. Okay, so the land area actually, even though it's a small part of the Earth, it's capturing. It does a lot with the photosynthesis thing. Okay, but our focus is on that side down there, and you can see the difference. You know, there's about 400 gigatons difference annually that's going on. But really, you know, this gets back to Einstein's thought. Really, the opportunity is that. Okay, we can not only deal with look at the massive fires that have been here in the western United States because of management, the way we're managing. And we have this, I'm down in New Mexico, those lands were burned, those forests were burned, every 5 to 7 years. They haven't been burned for about 100 years, so they got this catastrophic effect when the fire goes through there. And those lands are wilderness areas. So they can't even go in and do anything to keep it from doing catastrophic burns. That's paradigms. That's belief systems, you know. What we really want is wilderness qualities, characteristics. You know, a catastrophic burn is not a wilderness characteristic, okay? But we think it is. We think we're doing good stuff. Our paradigms are getting in the way of actually doing stuff that saves ourselves, okay? So we actually have this huge potential of increasing, you know, dealing with terrestrial photosynthesis to capture carbon and pull it back to the earth. And so this is the opportunities that we have. And I was at Paris with the talks this year, and what was interesting is that the scientists are saying that, yeah, we do definitely got to do some really big stuff on reducing emissions in the atmosphere. I mean, serious stuff. And it's really interesting how the media is really, you don't hear much about climate change except for what the Republicans are talking about in the debates nowadays. But we really got to do big stuff on the emission stuff. But the other thing that they also know now is that we got to do some really big stuff on pulling carbon back out of the sky. And if we can get those two things right, they say we're going to have about 150 years of climate disruption anyway. It's going to be a rough ride for the next 150 years. If we don't do that, you know, it's going to, it's serious what's going on right now. But the point of my presentation is the opportunity that we have with food and food production. So, you know, by dealing with this thing in the middle called carbon capture through photosynthesis, we can do things like reduce conflict between people, you know, by building consensus. And that gets back to the work that I do. We can increase food production. We can increase stabilization of species diversity. So we're losing a lot of species, but we're losing those species because the land is deteriorating. So if you change the way the land, what's happening on the landscape, you can start stabilizing those species conditions again. The quality and quantity of fresh water, you know, they talk about that's one of our greatest threats we have is our water supply in the western states and around the world. And I saw a new report, and every time we see these new reports, they're always worse than what they thought earlier, but fresh water is a huge issue. So if you get lands in the condition I showed you on that one ranch situation a little bit ago, that land, the good, healthy land, the water's going into the ground and it's staying in the ground. The other side is flushing off down to the ocean, just runs right off. There's nothing to hold and retain the water. Organic matter is what holds and retains water, which is carbon dioxide converted into sugars. So it's like this really, and then down here, this increased rural wealth and that sort of thing. I mean, the whole thing works if we do it right. Why don't we get that? The paradigms, it's the belief systems we have. We don't understand how you put this whole thing together. But when you do, it's remarkable what happens. So do we need to prove that these things work? No, I don't think. I mean, they work. They were out there today. I was walking outside in the food market and stuff. It's wonderful what people are doing. It does work. What we need to do is figure out how to accelerate what's happening out there all over the world. That's our challenge as a species, is figuring out what Rodale was talking about. If we could do what they were doing all over the world, we'd not have a problem. And we'd have a lot of people that were eating good, healthy, quality food. So I just throw this slide, and this is one of our national monuments, and down it's Chaco Canyon, and it's dying. And you walk out there, all you see is carcasses of dead grasses that used to be there. They're dying. The national monuments are dying in the West. And our paradigms don't even see it. Anyway, we need to figure out how to turn those lands into healthy, vibrant, where we got green photosynthesis happening all over the landscape, whether it's on grasslands or whether it's on farming all over the world. So that's our challenge. Now, Peter Senge, many, many years ago, wrote a book called The Fifth Discipline. There's some really interesting things in there. One is the concept of shifting the burden, which is what we often do, is we misdiagnose what the issues are, and we focus on the symptoms. We don't focus on what the original causes are very well. We want to get the fast fix and feel better, but really, why is that happening? And second, he talks about this concept called limits to growth, and that's what I've been really focusing on, is how do you make shift happen rapidly? Because as soon as you figure out that little point of where it all changes, things just take off. It is amazing. So it's figuring that out, that little focal point, and if you can find that point, everything changes. And that's what I've been working with, is this idea of limiting beliefs. And I'm not sure I have the time, but I'm going to say this really fast anyway. So let's just take these two rows right here in the center. This is when I go work with people, I say, where are you now? Where are you at in your life today? And they say, we're right here. Good, that's right. And then I say, where do you want to be? And they say, well, we want to be over here. This is our ideals. And I always sort of laugh about it, or kind of smirk about it, because if you want to be there, why are you there? What's your problem? Well, the problem is this roll back over here. And that's our limiting beliefs, our self-talk that says we can't be over there. So if you want to get over here, what you got to deal with is that over there. Once you change that, you get over here, okay? So an example of that is in Africa, when I was there, West Africa and Mali, and 15 years ago, one of the things is that they had 85% food insecurity in the villages I was working with. 7 ethnic groups. They actually were warring and killing each other before I got there. They were harming each other, 2 different language groups predominantly. And but 85% food insecurity. And I think their average per capita, the income was $45 a year, so they weren't rolling in money. That's 45 $1 bills spread out over 365 days. So I asked them, I said, could you grow 5 or 10% more food? And they said, yeah, we probably could. And I said, well, why don't you? I said, well, could you grow 20% more food? And they said, we might. And I said, well, I wanted a number that stretched them. So I said, could you grow 50% more food? And they said, nah, it's impossible. I said, good, we're going to use that number. So I wanted them to figure out this puzzle right here, how to increase food production by 50% without Western technology. And so I asked them, tell me first why it was impossible, and these were the reasons that they came up with. And then I said, I want you to answer this question. Given that it's impossible, if it were possible, what would you do? And they gave me these answers. I came back 15 months later, and they had increased food production by 78%, nearly doubled food production. Most people had less than a 4th grade education. And within 2 years of that work, the consensus work, violent conflict completely disappeared. And so that's the kind of change. In 15 months, they nearly doubled food production with the conditions that they had. That's human change. Okay, that's what's possible. Okay, and that's carbon. That's carbon captured out of the atmosphere and turned into food for people. Okay, how are we doing time? About it?
Yeah,
we're so I'm gonna stop there, and we're gonna go from there.
We need to, we're like a little bit behind, so we have to move on to the piano. But
Good.
yeah.
Good. All right.
At the end, everybody can come and
okay,
ask
good.
you questions.
Thanks very much for your time today. Good.